By the time the wall started breathing, Caleb had already decided he wasn't going to complain about the noise. Folks in towns like this don't whisper their legends to scare children. They whisper them to stay alive. And if you've heard the things that drift through thin walls on nights like these, you'd understand why people keep their voices low, or why stories like this end up carried by places like whispering narratives, where the dark knows its way home. Cheap motels came with a certain soundtrack. Distant highway hiss, ice machine coughing in the hall, late night arguments smothered behind floral patterned curtains. Room 8 of the Moonrise Motor Lodge was no different than bedspread. Thinner towels, and a wall between rooms that felt more like painted cardboard than anything meant to hold back another person's life. But this wall didn't sound like a life. It sounded like something trying to escape one. It began with a scraping, the soft kind you could mistake for hangers shifting in a closet or someone dragging a suitcase. A hesitant drag along the studs, then a pause, then another. Caleb lay on his back, staring at the water stain above the bed that looked like a lopsided wolf's head, and told himself he was just tired from the drive. Outside, the moon hung too low over the parking lot to swollen to red around the eddies, like an eye inflamed from staring at something it shouldn't. The town of El Carlo didn't appear on most maps. It was a byproduct of the highway more than a place to gas stations, a shuttered diner, one liquor store with bars on the windows, and the Moonrise, its crooked neon vacancy sign buzzing like a trapped insect. There was no reason to stop there unless you needed a bed, a shower, and a few hours where nobody knew your name. Caleb needed all three. What he did not need was the sound of somebody next door whispering like they were negotiating with their own heartbeat. The first words came thin through the wall, as if the plaster had a throat and was testing it. "Not yet," a woman's voice breathed, ragged and shaking. "Please, not yet." Caleb rolled onto his side. The digital clock by the bed read 1:47 a.m., its red numbers bleeding into the dark. He held his breath, listening. The AC rumbled, the highway murmured, and beyond that, beneath that, something else vibrated, like a low growl trapped in the wiring. There was a deal in places like this, an unspoken rule. You pretended not to hear what bled through the walls, and in return, nobody knocked on your door asking questions you didn't want to answer. Caleb had his own reasons for loving that rule, but the wall didn't care about rules. It shuddered under a sudden impact, a dull thud that rattled the cheap picture frame above the nightstand. Dust fell in a lazy, illuminated drift through the slant of moonlight cutting across the bed. He sat up, heart kicking once, hard. The stain above him seemed to have sharpened. The wolf's head had teeth now, eh? Caleb called before he could talk himself out of it, his voice sounding smaller than he liked in the cramped room. "You okay over there?" The reply came as a choked gasp, then a wet, grinding sound that had no business existing on the other side of a motel wall. Bones didn't sound like that when they moved. They weren't supposed to. "Lock it," the woman whispered. "Lock everything. Don't open for me." The scraping intensified. Not random, now rhythmic, desperate, climbing from the baseboard toward the ceiling like something inside the wall was learning how to use its new limbs. The bed shook with each impact. The vacancy sign's red glow pulsed brighter for a moment, washing the room in a heartbeat of blood-colored light. The moon outside stared through the thin curtains, watching. In towns like this, the legends don't need campfires. They collect in motel rooms and gas station bathrooms, in parking lot corners where the light doesn't quite reach. They cling to walls that remember every scream, every prayer, every deal made with the night. Folks in towns like this don't whisper their legends to scare children. They whisper them to stay alive. If you've ever lain awake and felt a wall pulse beside you, if you've heard someone on the other side sound less and less human with every breath, then you already know the kind of night that found Caleb in room 8. He swung his legs off the bed, bare feet meeting the cold, gritty carpet, and stared at the thin slab of paint and plaster that separated him from room 9. Another thud, another crackle. A line spread across the wall's surface like a vein, jagged and dark. "Don't come out," the woman begged herself, or something else. Not here, not with him so close. Caleb's hand drifted toward the deadbolt out of reflex. It was already locked. He checked it anyway, fingers trembling just enough to annoy him. He could walk to the lobby, tell the night clerk there was some kind of medical emergency. He could yell through the wall again. He could pretend he'd heard nothing at all. The growl came then low at first, like the distant hum of a semi-truck but layered, wrong, with too many notes. A human throat trying to remember how to sound like something older. The wall flexed inward by an inch, then sprang back, dust puffing from the baseboard. Something dragged across it from the other side, 5 parallel lines that squealed like metal on bone. Caleb realized his breath had synced with the noise. Inhale on the silence, exhale on the scrape. The room felt smaller with every cycle, the air thicker, smelling faintly of copper and wet dog, though he hadn't seen any animals since he'd pulled into the lot. If you're hearing this, don't lean closer to the wall. That's how it gets you the urge to listen better, to prove you're not imagining it. The night loves a listener. On the highway, a lone truck blasted past, its horn splitting the silence for a heartbeat. In that moment, everything paused, the scraping, the growling, even the whispering breaths on the other side. Then, softly, the woman laughed. It was the saddest sound Caleb had ever heard. "It's too late," she said. "I can feel the moon in my teeth." The water stain above him stretched, the wolf's head swallowing the ceiling in shadow. Open loops stirred in the dark, questions the town refused to answer, rules the locals followed without explaining, stories no one told anyone who didn't plan to stay. And outside, the moon kept climbing. Asterisk, asterisk. By the time the war began to breathe, Caleb had already made peace with the idea that he'd be getting almost no sleep. The Moonrise Motor Lodge had that kind of tiredness built into it. The neon sign out front buzzed like a trapped fly, its red vacancy flickering on and off with the patience of a dying heart monitor. The parking lot was half gravel, half oil stain, and the office smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner that had long since given up. But it was cheap, and it was open, and it sat just off a long, empty stretch of highway where the moon felt too close to the roof of the car. That was enough for him when he pulled in. The clerk, an old man with a tan that looked baked on, slid the room key across the counter with 2 fingers. His eyes didn't quite meet Caleb's. They flicked past him through the office window, toward the row of doors under the buzzing lights. "Room 8, the man said. "Middle unit." Caleb glanced at the laminated layout taped behind the counter. Rooms 1 through 6 on the left, 7 through 10 on the right. Room 8, dead center. "Any chance I can get a corner?" he asked, quieter. The clerk's jaw worked, as though he was chewing on a word he didn't want to spit out. His gaze flicked again to the row of rooms. One door in particular, door with its curtains drawn so tightly it looked like the window had been blacked out. "The corners are spoken for," he said. "You'll be fine, long as you keep your door locked." Caleb gave a tight laugh. "That a policy or a threat?" "Policy," the clerk said. "Threats don't work around here." There were claw marks, Caleb noticed, when he got out of the car. Not fresh, not obvious. Just 5 faint grooves in the concrete near the drainage ditch, as though somebody had dragged a rake in a bad mood. He stepped over them without thinking, suitcase in hand, the night air pressing cool against his skin. The moon hung low above the motel like a swollen lantern, its light to red at the edges, as if it had spent the day staring at something it shouldn't. The hills behind the building formed a dark, crouched shape against the sky. Room 8 was exactly what he expected. A bed with a floral spread, a nightstand with a wobbling lamp, a bathroom with a tile floor that never quite dried. The air conditioner protested when he switched it on, then coughed itself into a wheezing hum. The wall on his right ran solid and plain from floor to ceiling. On the other side, a brass 9 was screwed into old wood. He set his bag down and sat on the bed, feeling the springs announce his weight. The highway noise seeped faintly through the window, a distant hiss. Somewhere down the row, a TV murmured a late-night show. Crickets tuned their legs outside. For a blessed few minutes, the world was just that, tired, ordinary noise. Then he heard the first sound from room 9. It wasn't loud. A soft scrape, like fingernails tracing the inside of a wooden box. It ran in a slow, deliberate line across the shared wall, paused, then came again, higher this time. Caleb watched the blank paint as though it might darken where the noise passed. He told himself it was a hanger in a closet, a suitcase, a chair leg. People travelled with all kinds of junk. People had restless nights. People weren't his problem. The scraping stopped. Something thumped once, deep in the structure, and a dusting of plaster sifted down onto the nightstand. He lay back, staring at the ceiling. The water stain spread across it in a vague shape, a brownish bloom. As he watched, it seemed to tighten at one end, almost like a snout tipped upward. A pair of eye-shaped gaps in the discoloration stared back. He blinked hard, rubbed his face, and reached to switch off the lamp. The room fell into a muted glow, lit by the neon sign seeping red through the curtains and the full moon leaking in pale across the carpet. The thin wall beside him cooled under the night, radiating a faint chill. Then came the voice. "Not here," a woman whispered, so softly he almost mistook it for the AC. "Not again, please, not here." Her words seeped through the wall, as if the paint itself had learned to speak. There was a raw edge to the sound, a fraying of control, like someone trying to reason with a nightmare. Caleb's hand froze on the lamp switch. He listened for laughter, for the rise and fall of a phone call, for the shift of another voice. Nothing, just that one strung-lit plea. There was something wrong with the moon, and there was something very wrong with the way her breath hitched. Between each word, the wall pulsed outward beneath the next impact. A dull, meaty thud that made the headboard creak away from the plaster. The air in the room seemed to move with it, sucking in and pushing out in a slow cadence that didn't match his own breathing. Air didn't do that. Walls didn't do that. Not in the world he was used to. Another scrape climbed upward, nails, or something worse dragging a path that squealed faintly. A second sound layered underneath wet, grinding, the intimate. Invasive noise of joints moving in ways they had never been designed to move. Caleb sat up, swung his legs to the floor, and stared at the hairline crack snaking from the baseboard. It hadn't been there when he walked in. "Hey," he called, voice careful, pitched low. "You okay over there?" The room held its breath. Then the answer came, not back through the wall, but from deeper inside it. A growl, muffled by plaster, an insulation, rumbled out with a resonance that made the lamp flicker. It wasn't quite animal, not quite human, a layered vibration that started in the gut and climbed up into the teeth. The kind of sound that woke a very old part of the Brennan told it, immediately, that this was wrong and it was close. "Lock it," the woman's voice rasped, riding on the echo. "Lock your door. Don't open if I knock." Caleb looked at the deadbolt. It was already turned, the metal peg sitting clean in its socket. He rose anyway, heart punching against his ribs, and checked the chain. The cheap brass links rattled dotty. Thought of laughing, of calling back something like, "You having a rough night, or is this some kind of prank?" But the sound of her breathing bled through the paint, and there was nothing funny in it. Each inhale went ragged halfway. Each exhale scraped like it dragged up through gravel. The moonlight brightened suddenly, as if the sky outside had cleared all at once. A beam slipped between the curtain edges and painted a silver stripe across the center of the room, cutting through the red wash from the neon sign. The light met in the middle on the wall between the rooms, making the paint there look almost translucent in that pale, vibrating rectangle. The wall rose and fell. Folks in towns like this don't whisper their legends to scare children. They whisper them to stay alive. Somewhere, in the diner that had once served swing shift truckers, in the gas station where the night attendant pretended not to hear the far-off howls, in the cluttered living room where the clerk went home and drank in front of a muted TV, the story of Room 9 was already half told. It clung to the edges of the town like fog, curling around tires and telephone poles, waiting for someone who didn't know the rules. Caleb didn't know the rules. He only knew the sound of bones. They creaked behind the wall, building from a slow, protesting stretch into a symphony of popping cartilage and sliding joints. Every snap carried through the studs, thin, sharp punctuation to the heavy thuds of something hitting the floor, then the wall, then the ceiling. His mind rushed to assign human explanations. Seizure. Someone off their meds. A really bad fight with an invisible attacker. But no human spine could make the sound of vertebrae grinding as they lengthened. One by one, each shift tearing a strained whimper from the throat attached to them. That whimper turned into a low, choked howl and cut off, stranglet halfway. The wall between them flexed again, harder. A spiderweb of cracks fractured out from an invisible impact point, spreading in jagged lines. Dust sifted down in a fine, grey veil, settling on the bedside Bible and the ashtray nobody had bothered to remove since the 80s. The air filled with a smell that made his stomach knot. Copper and musk, hot animal and old rain. The scent of a wet dog left out too long, mixed with something wilder. Something edged with panic. The highway beyond the parking lot went eerily quiet. No trucks, no distant bray of horns, just the ringing silence of a night listening to itself. If anyone else had been in that room, they might have turned up the TV, dug earplugs out of a glide bag, pretended they heard nothing. That was how people survived weird nights in stranger towns. But Caleb found himself standing closer to the wall, bare feet cold on the thin carpet, hand pressed flat against the paint. His palm trembled as the surface moved under it, rising and falling in shallow, frantic waves. On the other side, fingers scraped downward, 5 parallel lines, 5 points of pressure. The trail of them tracked his own hand's path exactly, separated by less than an inch of construction material and a lifetime of things he wasn't meant to understand. If this reminds you of some sound you've heard through a wall you couldn't see through, then you already know what his pulse felt like. Wild, erratic, caged in. The woman made a sound then, low and guttural, the last syllables of language dissolving on her tongue. "Moon's too close," she gurgled. "It's in my bones." Outside, the swollen disk over the hills seemed to swell further, clouds skirting its edges like they were afraid to touch it. El Carlo had its rules. Don't park facing the ridge on the night of a full moon. Don't leave meat in the open air past midnight. Don't stare too long at the tree line when the wind dies. Don't rent room 8 when room 9 is occupied. The clerk had broken one of those rules to fill a bed. The wall between those 2 rooms took a long, pained breath and exhaled a growl that did not belong in any building meant for people. The night had chosen the throat it was going to close its teeth around, and it had chosen someone who didn't yet realize that the legend next door was not about a monster trying to get out. It was about one trying not to. Caleb wasn't the kind of man who went looking for trouble, but trouble had found the motel, and it had found the gap between two rooms where the paint had started to crack. Asterisk, asterisk, the next impact wasn't a thud. It was a lunge. A full-bodied strike from the other side of the wall that sent a ripple through. The plaster, like something alive, was trying to shove its way into the room. Caleb stumbled backward, heart slamming against his ribs, as dust rained from the ceiling in a soft, choking shower. The lamp flickered again, guttering in and out as though the electricity itself were afraid. For a breath, the wall bulged inward, swelling like a pulse under skin. Then it snapped back, vibrating like a taut drumhead. Caleb stared, his breath fogged in the suddenly cold air. No heater had turned on, no draft had crept in. The temperature had dropped because something on the other side had taken the warmth. With it, another sound slid through the wall. Not a scrape, not a cry. A snapping, quick and sharp, followed by a series of stuttering jerks in the plaster as if fingers were spasming against it. Then came the laughter. It wasn't the woman's laugh anymore. It was deeper, layered, like something speaking through her throat, exploring the shape of human mirth and finding it amusing. Caleb backed toward the door, one hand reaching instinctively for the lock he already knew was engaged. The laughter cut off abruptly, then a single, wet gasp, then dash silence so complete it felt intentional. "Hey," Caleb whispered, hating how small his voice sounded. "Ma'am, listen. I think you're hurt." His words dissolved when the wall expanded outward by nearly 2 inches. A hand or something shaped like a hand pressed from the other side, its outline distorting the paint. The fingers were too long, too jointed. They curled downward, feeling their way along the studs as they're learning how to use themselves. One finger dragged downward slowly, carving a fresh line in the plaster, deeper this time. The drywall didn't crack, it split, eddious, peeling like torn paper. Caleb froze. He wanted to call the front desk. He wanted to leave the room. He wanted to scream. Instead, all he could do was stare at the widening seam in the wall as something warm and copper-scented leaked through the crack and traced a dark line down the baseboard. A whisper slid through the opening, breathy and broken. "Run." It was her voice again, barely, but beneath it something growled. The moonlight behind the curtains flared brighter, white-hot for a heartbeat, as if the sky outside had ignited. Shadows in the room stretched long and thin, reaching toward the wall, like they were being pulled into it. And then came the smell. Wet earth, rotting leaves, animal musk, and beneath it all, fear. Fresh and sharp, like someone bleeding adrenaline. Fear junkies know this scent. The scent that means the night is watching. Caleb's chest tightened. His instincts screamed at him to get away from the wall, from room 9, from whatever was learning to breathe through plaster. He took one step backward. The wall growled at him, not metaphorically, not in his imagination. A deep, guttural resonance rattled the studs. Paint chips fluttered to the carpet like dead moths. Caleb's heel hit his suitcase. He tripped, falling onto one knee, but he didn't break eye contact with the wall, as if looking away would let it move closer. The crack widened further. Something pushed at it from the interior side, something jointed, something black-furred, something that clicked softly as though assembling itself. He scrambled back to his feet. "This is insane," he hissed to himself. This is some kind of drug thing, some kind of a voice, impossibly close, breathed through the seam. No, this is the moon. Another snapping sound tore through the wall, followed by a groan so low it vibrated in his bones. Caleb clamped both hands over his ears. It didn't help. The sound wasn't meant for ears. It was meant for marrow, for instinct. Something in him responded ancient and terrified. A sudden quiet fell, heavy and unnatural. Then something sniffed him through the wall. Slow, curious, deliberate. Caleb choked on a breath as the dry wall dented inward where a nose pressed through, flattening the paint. His pulse hammered against his throat. Another sniff, deeper, hungrier. The voice from the other side, no longer human, shivered through the crack. "I can smell your fear." A persona-driven whisper slipped through his panic. If you've ever felt watched through a wall, mark this moment. Some walls remember more than people do. The sniffing stopped. Something large shifted in room 9. Something standing up. Its shadow long-limbed, wrong in every proportion, stretched across the crack beneath the paint. And then, with a single deliberate press, a claw slid through the drywall. Not a nail, not a splinter. A curved, black talon glinting under the silver moonbeam. Caleb staggered backward until he hit the opposite wall. The creature on the other side inhaled. Then, with an exhale that sounded like a broken howl in a human throat, it said, "You shouldn't have come here." The crack spidered. The talon withdrew. The room held its breath. A curiosity reset dropped like a trap door beneath him. The noises stopped entirely, as if the creature were waiting, listening, smiling. And, in the silence, Caleb realized whatever it wasn't trying to get out anymore. It was waiting for him to move. Asterisk, the silence that followed was not peace. It was calculation. Caleb stood pinned against the far wall, chest rising in tight, uneven jolts, as though the air had thickened. The cracked plaster across the room no longer moved, no longer breathed, no longer hinted at anything on the other side. And that was somehow worse. Predators knew when to wait. Predators listened. The thin strip of moonlight cutting across the carpet flickered once as a cloud passed overhead, casting the room into a soft darkness, tinged only by the red pulse of the vacancy sign outside. In that dim, the hairline crack looked like a slit pupil staring back at him. He swallowed hard. "Okay," he whispered to the empty room. "You need to get out." You need. A heavy thump landed on the other side of the wall. Not frantic this time. Intentional. Then another, steady footsteps, if you could call them. That moving across the floorboards of room 9. Slow, testing, uneven in a way that suggested an anatomy relearning its balance. Caleb pressed a shaking hand against his sternum, willing his heartbeat too slow. It didn't. On the other side of the wall, something dragged lightly across wood. A tail, a hand, a shifting spine. No, not a hand, not anymore. The wall closest to the bathroom mirror quivered, lifting a small burst of dust. Something brushed it from the other side. Soft whisper light, like fur sliding along paint. Caleb's breath hitched. Then a woman's voice, barely human, barely holding on. "Please, don't open the door." The voice carried a tremble of agony, of begging, of warning. But beneath it, beneath the words, something else vibrated, something hungry. It was the same voice he'd heard before, but now torn in 2 directions. One pleading, one growling, both at war over a single throat. Caleb took 1 step toward the door. He didn't make it to a second. The wall boomed like something massive had slammed into it again, but not where it had before. This strike hit higher, somewhere between Caleb's height and the ceiling. Claws not 1, not 2, but 5 sank through the drywall in a stabbing flash, ripping parallel gashes downward in a shower of plaster. Light from the next room spilled through the wounds, shifting, flickering, as though cast by a form that wouldn't hold still. Caleb stumbled backward, tripping over his suitcase and landing hard on the carpet. The claws retracted, Something scraped them against the studs, as if sharpening them. Then came the breathing. Not normal breathing. Not human breathing. A ragged, animalistic panting hot, too close, fogging the crack with condensation that beaded and trickled in thin lines down the paint. The creature was right there, inches away, staring through the slits it had made. Caleb crawled backward on his hands, staring at the torn wallpaper like it might burst open again. The creature inhaled deeply, slow, deliberate. "You smell like fear," it whispered. The voice was hers, and it wasn't. It bent wrong, like bones twisting under skin. Caleb's thoughts scattered. Nothing human sounded like that. Nothing human could speak through breath that thick and wet. He pushed himself to his feet, wobbling, and moved toward the door. Maybe he could slip out, run to the office, get the clerk, call someone, anyone. But before he could grab the doorknob, the woman in room 9 screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It wasn't an animal scream. It was both layered, tearing as though the sound itself were being ripped apart as it escaped her chest. The wall shook. The lamp shorted out. The mirror above the dresser cracked straight down the middle. A jagged lightning bolt fracture that divided his reflection into 2 uneven halves. Caleb froze, hand hovering inches from the door. The scream twisted into a howl-deep, resonant, chilling, the kind of sound that could only be made by a throat splitting into a shape designed for the moon. He staggered backward, clutching the dresser for balance. There was no denying it now. No comforting lies, no rational anchors. Something was transforming next door. The thumping stopped abruptly. Then whispers. Not the woman, not the creature. Voices, multiple, soft, overlapping whispers, like children speaking secrets under a blanket. Caleb stiffened. One whisper slid through the cracks, clear and cold. "She's fighting it. She won't win." Another followed. "You're already marked." He shook his head violently as if he could shake the words loose. "What do you mean marked?" He choked out. A third voice, older, deeper, answered. "She smelt you." Something slammed against the wall again, this time directly behind him. He lurched forward, spinning. The drywall ballooned outward with such force it dented almost a full inch before retracting. The moon outside brightened, a silver blade splitting between the curtains. It hit the wall just as something on the other side turned toward it. A silhouette formed through the cracks, long neck, hunched shoulders, arms too long, jaw extended, ears pointed. Something part human, part beast, part ancient, part hers. Caleb's pulse hammered wildly. The creature inhaled again, the sound thick and wet, then exhaled a word that no voice box should have been able to shape. Open. A persona-tuned CTA whispered through the dark. If you've ever felt something waiting on the other side of a thin wall, breathe slow, something always listens. The creature's silhouette shifted, bones snapping into new places. The wall cracked from floor to ceiling. Caleb realized something horrifying. This wasn't her giving in. This was her holding it back. And she was losing. The crack in the wall widened with a sound like ribs tearing apart. Caleb staggered backward as the paint split open in a jagged line, exposing the darkness inside the wall. The air pouring from the gap was hot, humid, and thick with a scent he instantly recognized, even though he'd never smelled it before. Predator breath. Not animal, not human. Something between, something older, something starving. A low, trembling groan seeped through the widening split, a groan that dragged the remnants of a woman's voice behind it, as if the human part of her was being pulled along the floor inside that room, refusing to let go. Then came a grinding crack. then another and another, bone meeting bone in ways no skeleton should move. Caleb's stomach clenched, his skin prickled, his instincts screamed to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. They trembled, locked between fight and flee. On the other side of the wall, the woman, what was left of her, let out a ragged, choking gasp. "Stay back." The last word dissolved in a wet snap. A shadow surged upward behind the wall, tall, enough to blot out the strip of moonlight shining through the gaps. Something scraped the ceiling, claws or knuckles, or a spine rearranging itself into a new order. A heavy thud shook the adjoining room, like knees slamming into the floor. Then came the scream. It erupted from the woman's throat in a shattering, agonized blast, half sob, half snarl, like she was being dragged out of her own skin. Her voice fractured mid-cry, splitting into two competing tones, a human wail, a lupin howl, both layered, both wrong. Caleb clapped his hands over his ears, but the sound crawled through the wall, vibrating against bone, making his teeth hum. The vacancy sign outside flickered violently red, then silver, then darkness-like. The electricity couldn't decide which world it belonged to. And then silence. A silence so complete that Caleb could hear his own heart punching at the inside of his chest. He lowered his hands slowly. The wall bulged outward, not violently, not urgently, deliberately. Something enormous on the other side pressed its weight against it, testing the resistance, testing the boundary, testing him. A single claw eased out through the crack, curling downward. A second followed, then a third. They moved slowly, as if savoring the moment. The tips were black, no shine, no reflection, like obsidian carved into talons. Beneath their edge, the plaster crumbled in tiny white flakes. Caleb stumbled backward, tripping over the dresser and hitting the floor hard. The creature's breath seeped through the gap, labored and feral, hot enough to fog the cracked mirror behind him. He watched the reflection distort his own face, pale and panicked, the wall behind him bulging like a lung. On the other side, something rasped against the floor. Claws on wood, the sound of a body shifting weight to stand upright. The moonlight outside strengthened the clouds, parting completely. A full silver beam hit the curtains and spilled across the room like liquid metal. The creature reacted. It inhaled sharply, a guttural intake that rattled the wall studs. Then its voice dawned strangled, still fighting, pressed through the crack. "Don't let me through." Caleb froze. The human part of her wasn't just present. It was begging, holding on by the thinnest thread. A thread that snapped in the very next breath. The creature roared, not like a wolf, not like a person, like something the moon itself had birthed. The roar shook the motel. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. The lamp exploded in a burst of sparks. The dresser slid a full foot across the floor. Then the wall finally gave. The drywall shattered outward in a hail of broken plaster and splintered studs. Caleb shielded his face as debris rained down. Through the settling dust, a massive shape lunged halfway into the room, snarling, shoulders too wide for the gap. He saw fur first black, streaked with silver, thick and bristling. Then a jaw elongated, split with raw gums, teeth erupting at wild angles. Then eyes gold, burnished with red, flickering between agony and hunger. She wasn't fully through. The wall held her by inches, but not for long. The werewolf twisted, claws tearing at the remaining studs, muscles coiling with inhuman strength. Her human voice flickered through the growl. "Go!" Another voice layered beneath it, deeper, ancient, amused. "He's marked." Caleb grabbed his suitcase, no reason, except panic, and hurled it toward the open door. His brain screamed, "Run, run, run," but his legs felt like wet sand up behind him. The werewolf slammed both arms against the opening, widening it another few inches. Splinters screamed. Metal bracket snapped. Her jaw unhinged fully, muzzle elongating with a visible pop. She howled short, sharp, frantic. A signal, a warning, a claim. The moonlight flared brighter as if answering her. A persona-driven CTA whispered through the terror. If you've ever heard something change on the other side of a wall, remember this moment. Not everything that knocks is meant to come in. The werewolf pulled back for one more strike. This one would break the room open, break Caleb open. Her claws flexed, her spine arched. Her legs bent backward, preparing to launch on as moonlight carved a silver line across her muzzle. She whispered one last fractured plea. Run, before he gets here. Double quotes he, not her, not the creature in the wall. Someone or something else, something worse. And it was coming. The werewolf drew back for the final lunge. Her claws scraped against the remaining studs, carving twin gouges deep into the wood. Her breath poured through the shattered wall in hot, wet bursts, panting like something running out of time. The muscles along her shoulders swelled beneath silver-striped fur, trembling under the pull of the moon. She wasn't just changing, she was losing. Caleb scrambled to his feet, backing toward the motel door. His hands slapped at the lock. He fumbled, twisted it, pulled it didn't budge. The deadbolt turned, but the door wouldn't open. It felt held, pinned shut by something on the outside. A slow, deliberate pressure pushed back against the door, as though a palm much larger than his were braced against it. He froze. The werewolf within the wall went still at the same moment. Her golden eyes widened, pupils thin as slits, ears flattening. For the first time, she looked afraid. Her lupin mouth opened. He's here. The words came out, torn, frayed at the edges, threaded with a low, rumbling warning growl. Her claws withdrew from the studs. Her entire massive frame shrank an inch not from transformation, but from dread. Caleb's skin prickled. Every instinct in him screamed at once. Something outside stepped onto the walkway. He heard it through the thin motel door. A single footfall, then another, heavy, measured, predatory, dot running, not rushing, arriving. The werewolf in the wall pressed herself against the studs, ears twitching rapidly. Her eyes stayed locked on the door of room 8, not on Caleb, not on her half-broken exit, on the door. Don't move, she whispered, her voice flickering like a candle guttering in wind. Don't make a sound. He hunts silence. He hunts places where fear holds still. Another footstep, close to Caleb, didn't breathe. A long shadow slid across the gap beneath the motel room door. It was stretched, wrong in its proportions, not like hers. Broader, taller, shoulders too wide to be human. The silhouette paused outside the frame, blocking the hallway light. The werewolf whimpered softly. It was the most human sound she'd made since the transformation began. A low, vibrating growl seeped through the crack beneath the door, not hers, deeper, thicker. A sound that made the studs in the walls tremble. The door handle twitched just once, a dull, small metal click that sounded like a knuckle cracking. Caleb clamped both hands over his mouth. The werewolf in the wall pulled back from the opening she'd made, backing deeper into the darkness of room 9. Her shoulders shook violently. She was terrified. Moonchooser sides, she murmured. He's the one I chose tonight. Caleb's blood went cold. Another slow click of the door handle. Then a deep inhalation, louder, sharper, like something outside was sniffing the air through the cracks around the frame. A rumble followed, not a growl. Something worse. A purr, guttural, unpleased. The werewolf inside room 9 snarled in reply, a voice cracking between beast and woman. Get away from him, she hissed. He's not yours. The shadow outside shifted, not stepping back, turning toward her. A single claw, massive, curved, glinting faintly under the moonlight, slid under the frame of Caleb's door and scraped upward, carving a slow line into the wood. Sparks flickered. Caleb flinched backward as the claw drew a shallow, deliberate X into the bottom of the door, claiming, marking. The werewolf in the wall roared and lunged toward the broken opening between rooms, slamming her full weight into the studs. The wall cracked further, chunks of drywall collapsing outward. She forced her muzzle halfway through the gap jaw, gaping, teeth bared in a snarl so raw it shook the room. Run. She screamed, her voice distorted into a tearing howl. The door to room 8 dented inward as something outside struck it once lightly, like a warning tap from a creature that didn't need to try. Caleb grabbed the heavy motel chair, swung it at the window, and shattered the glass in a spray of shards. Cold night air rushed in. The moon glared overhead like a silver wound in the sky. Behind him, the door cracked again, the frames splintering. He climbed onto the sill and froze. From the parking lot below, 3 more shadows stretched across the asphalt, long, tall, sharp-dashed. Not wolves, not people. Others. The werewolf in room 9 howled with a sound of pure despair. They're here for me, but they'll take you too. Another strike hit the door, this one harder. The wood bowed outward. The lock tore free. The hinges shrieked. A persona-driven echo CTA slid through the dread. If the night ever chooses you, don't wait for the door to break. Jump, run, survive the telling. The werewolf twisted inside the wall, body contorting unnaturally as she forced herself into the broken opening, trying not to escape, but to block the way between the rooms. Go, she bellowed. Now! The door burst inward, and something far larger than her stepped inside. Asterisk. The thing that stepped into room 8 was too large for the doorway, but it came through anyway. The frame splintered around its shoulders, wood snapping like ribs. The first part Caleb saw was an arm thick furred, corded with muscle that shifted like coiled ropes beneath the skin. Its claws scraped the floorboards, leaving long, smoking grooves behind them. The second thing he saw, rather, felt was its presence. A weight in the air, a gravity, a cold that crept across the room like frost forming in fast motion along the walls. The moonlight bent toward it. It wasn't a werewolf. It was something the werewolves feared. The creature's head ducked into the room, muzzle long, eyes black as tar, but when it exhaled, the breath that rolled out wasn't hot like the Chevelf's. It was cold. Cold enough to fog the air like winter wind. Cold enough to make Caleb's joints ache instantly. Cold enough to make the silver moonlight outside flicker like a dying candle. The she-wolf in room 9 thrust herself further into the broken opening, snarling, wedging her huge body between the studs and the creature's approach. Blood trickled from where jagged wood pierced her fur, but she didn't move. She was trying to protect him. The beast stepped forward, each footfall rattling the floor. The vacancy sign beyond the window buzzed, cracked, then went dark entirely. The room dimmed in unnatural twilight. The creature's voice came out as a low rumble. Move. The she-wolf bared her teeth. Not him, she growled. Take me. The creature leaned its massive head in her direction. Its muzzle hovered inches from her exposed throat. Caleb expected it to rip into her, tear her out of the wall, end her in a heartbeat. Instead, it inhaled, a sharp, deep pull like sucking the scent of her pain directly from her body. Her growl faltered, her ears dropped, and then the beast turned its head toward Caleb. Its nose twitched, marked. It whispered, the sound like 2 stones grinding together at the bottom of a frozen river. He already stinks of moonfire. Caleb stumbled backward toward the shattered window. Cold air poured in, stinging his skin like needles. He had seconds, maybe less, to make a decision he didn't understand. "I didn't ask for any of this," he managed, voice breaking. The creature's lips curled back, revealing a row of long, wet, glistening teeth. "You walked into it." The she-wolf lunged, not at Caleb, at the monster. She hurled herself forward, forcing her huge body through the broken wall in a shower of splinters. She slammed into the beast's flank with a crack of bone and a thunderous impact that threw both creatures sideways into the nightstand. The lamp shattered, sparks danced. The room went black except for the jagged moonlight. "Run!" She roared again, her voice splitting between woman and beast, pain and purpose. Caleb didn't think. He vaulted through the broken window. Glass sliced his arms. The cold air slapped his face. He hit the gravel parking lot hard, rolling until his shoulder struck the wheel of a parked car. Behind him, the motel shuddered. A crash echoed. A howl tore through the night. Two voices, one pained, one triumphant. He scrambled to his feet. The parking lot wasn't empty anymore. The three shadows he'd seen earlier stepped into the moonlight, all thin-limbed creatures with matted fur and glowing eyes. They moved like they'd grown from the darkness itself, heads tilted toward him, nostrils flaring. They weren't the same as the beast inside. They weren't the same as the woman. Something in between, something joining the hunt. Caleb's pulse roared in his ears. Behind him, the beast inside room 8 let out a guttural snarl, followed by the sickening thud of bodies slamming into walls. The she-wolf shrieked, the sound laced with defiant sand agony. He ran. He sprinted across the lot, past shattered glass, past abandoned cars, past the neon sign that now flickered back to life with a sickly red pulse. He didn't look back. Not when the she-wolf howled his name in a broken, human voice. Not when the beast answered with a roar that swallowed the night. Not even when the three shadows in the parking lot began to chase him on all fours. He didn't look back until he reached the highway, and by then, the motel was quiet. Too quiet. The parking lot was empty. The windows were still. The vacancy sign burned steadily, its glow innocent and hollow. Room 8's door hung open, room 9's window. Curtains fluttered softly. The night pretended nothing had happened. Caleb's chest heaved, his arms bled, and his breath fogged in front of him, not from cold, from heat, moon heat. He stared at his hands, at the long scratches across his skin where the creature's breath had touched him, at the faint silver shimmer in the wounds. He felt the wrongness blooming inside him. Slow, pulsing, rhythmic. The moon seemed brighter now, brighter than it should be. A whisper rode the wind behind him, soft as fur. "Now you understand why we tried to keep you out." He turned. No one was there, only the highway, the dark hills, and the moon, watching him like a teacher, waiting for a lesson to sink in.